Steve, what is serendipity?
What is serendipity?
Yeah.
Well, one thing it is a world-famous ice cream parlor in New York City. Are you familiar with it?
I'm not. Is it still open?
To my knowledge, it is. It's world famous for amazing ice cream concoctions. But to answer your question more specifically, I think by serendipity you mean wonderful things happening kind of out of the blue.
Sure, yeah.
Yeah, without planning. The opposite of planning.
And do you believe in serendipity?
Yeah, I'd say my life is pretty much serendipitous, yes.
How do you open yourself up to serendipity?
Oh, that's an interesting question, sort of an existential question. I think what happens is serendipity either happens or it doesn't happen to you. I don't think, it's like falling in love, you know, you can try your best to make something happen in your love life, say, but if it's going to happen, there's this ineffable thing called chemistry, which allows it to happen. And I think the same kind of operating principles relate to serendipity in your life.
Sure, I got a great gal for you. She's studying to do this, and then you meet the person and there's nothing there, and then
Right.
the person who's totally wrong for you, and
Yeah, it
ends up-
happens.
Right. Do you think an artist can hurt themselves in some sense, or their career, by not believing in serendipity?
Well, I mean, I can't speak for other people, but I believe that whatever you believe, you put out into the universe, okay? It's sort of a karmic thing. So if you're open to serendipitous good things randomly happening to you in life, they most likely will happen.
So it's being like almost like receptacle for things, or a vessel somehow for interesting things to happen, stopping to talk to people on the street. Maybe you've been warned, don't speak to strangers, but sometimes amazing things can come from that.
Yeah, well, actually, this is the story of my life, basically. Some of the best things that ever happened to me in my life came out totally serendipitously, out of the blue, completely out of the blue.
Do you have any examples of some serendipitous instances in your life?
I'll give you a primary one, okay? So I graduated from the University of Miami, Florida, and then got a scholarship to law school. And I went to law school for the first year. I decided that law was not for me, so I tell my mother, who was a single mom at the time, my dad had passed away earlier, I said to my mom, I'm going to drop out of law school. I'm not going back for the second year, okay? And I'm going to New York to do what I've always wanted to do, which was write comic books, okay? So my mother being a Jewish mother and I being her only son and her being a single mom, my mother was not too happy with that decision, as you might imagine. But I was confirmed in this is what I was going to do. So my mother says to me, well, you know, we live here in Miami Beach and it's very warm. You're going to go to New York and it's very cold there right now. You don't have any warm clothes. And I said, you know, Mom, you're right. So I get this idea in my head. I'm going to go to Macy's and buy some warm clothes. Now, I had probably been in Macy's twice before that in my life. I don't know what impelled me to go to Macy's. But before I go there, my mother also says, you know, it's very expensive to live in New York City. And you don't have that much money saved up from various little jobs and whatever. So she says to me, you know, how are you going to afford living in New York? And I say, I don't know, Mom, but I'm going to do it. So here comes the serendipity. And when I tell this story to people, they're just gobsmacked by it. So I'm at Macy's, maybe the third time in my life in the store. And I'm at this circular clothing display, you know, where you can turn the rack and it comes around, right? So I'm looking at the small amount of warm clothes they have there on this circular display, and I turn it to look at some of the other stuff. And suddenly I look up and I see there's a woman on the other side of the circular rack. And I go, oh, I'm very sorry. You were looking at clothes and I moved them away from you. Okay, so she laughed and we started talking. And I tell the woman, you know, I'm buying these clothes. You know, we get a little conversation. I said, I'm buying these clothes because I'm going to New York to write comic books. And she laughs, right? And she says to me this. She says, so where are you going to live in New York? And I say, oh, I'm not really sure. And then she says to me this. She says, I happen to own a rent-controlled apartment on East 79th Street at 2nd Avenue. And next week, I'm going to Europe for a year. Would you like to sublease my apartment? Now, you tell me,
Wow.
What are the odds? 1,000,000,000 to 1 that would have happened? But that is how serendipity to the max, serendipity squared, got me to New York City.
And when you went home to tell Mom, what did she say?
Oh, she didn't believe it. She could not believe it. But then when it was confirmed to her by this woman, you know, that this was indeed happening, my mother gave up in terms of trying to get me to go back to law school, because she just figured, well, you know, I wanted this and somehow the universe gave it to me. So if that isn't one of the most incredible serendipitous stories I've ever heard, you know.
It's fantastic. I was just curious, what type of law were you practicing? Were you, sorry.
Well, I was just in the first year of law school, and you don't even know what you're going to practice yet, okay? You just got to get through that first year, which is always considered the toughest year, which I did do, and it's usually considered, if you get through that first year, the rest is like a breeze. So for me to decide not to go back was not happy to anybody but me, a happy decision.
You have many stories about serendipity, one of which is right there in your hands, and I'm wondering if you can hold up that beautiful cover for us.
Yeah.
Gorgeous. And this has become your life's work.
Yeah.
And that is another instance of serendipity?
Yeah. Okay. So you see the book on camera? Okay, I'll put it down now. All right. So in the mid-1980s, my wife and I moved to the state of Maine, where we had a very good set of mutual friends. And I was the owner of an advertising agency in Princeton, New Jersey, prior to moving to Maine. And then when I sold my ad agency in Jersey and moved to Maine, I reestablished my ad agency there in the town of Auburn, Maine. And so my very good friend, who had a lot of connections in that area, started giving me names of his clients for his accounting firm, and said, you know, they could use some advertising. There was no advertising agency up there in the mid-'80s until I got up there, right? So here's what happens. I go to see a new potential client named Cody's Old Fashioned Ice Cream. Now, this may sound like small town stuff in Maine, but Yankee Magazine, which is like the arbiter of all things cool in New England, called Cody's Ice Cream, quote unquote, the best damn ice cream in New England. So, you know, they were serious ice cream company, right? So I go to the office of Nancy Cody, co-owner with her husband Roland of Cody's Old Fashioned Ice Cream. And I'm looking around and I see in her office these fabulous pen and ink drawings, put up around the office. And I look at them and I say, hey, whose art is that? And Nancy says, that's my son, Dan. And I'll tell you what, Steve, if you use Dan as the artist on all of our advertising, I'll give you the account. So not being stupid, I immediately said yes, plus I loved the artwork that I saw, okay? So a week later, I go and I visit Dan at his home, and we get talking, and I tell Dan about, how I've been dabbling in comic books my whole life and how much I love them. And he said, man, I would really, really, really love to work on a comic book with you, in addition to doing the advertising. So he says, you got any ideas? What could we work on? Now I have to go back. I got to do a little flashback. Couple of days before I go to meet Nancy and then Dan, I'm unpacking from our move from Jersey to Maine, and this suitcase that I had a lot of stuff in falls on the floor, cracks open, and one piece of paper flies out. It's a one-page synopsis of a story called Zen. Now, what was the backstory of this synopsis? When I was living in New York City for about a year and a half, as I mentioned earlier, I started writing comic books. And I mostly wrote comic book stories for these black and white, sort of like horror magazines with titles like Nightmare and Psycho, things like that, Witches' Tales. And what would happen is you would hand off a synopsis to the publisher, okay? And then artists would come in to the office in Midtown Manhattan, visit the publisher, and look at the various story ideas. And if they liked an idea, then you could write the story and it would be published, right? And that happened to me with a number of stories, but never with this story called Zen. So before I left New York, the publisher gave me back that one-page synopsis, which came with me to Maine, which fell out of the cracked open box that I presented to Dan. And thus Zen was born. Once again, if that isn't serendipity, then, I don't know what is.
What's the relationship between Zen, the Intergalactic Ninja, and Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
Oh yeah, there's quite a relationship. So in the mid to late 1980s, and the first issue of Zen came out in November of 1987, that period in the comic book industry was known as the quote-unquote black and white explosion, okay? And the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles pretty much precipitated that entire movement. And it was created in New England just as Zen was. So Dan and I work on creating the first issue of Zen for about a year and a half. The writing goes fast, the art is laborious and time-consuming. And Dan did the entire book in full airbrushed color. This is when there was no computer airbrushing. I'm talking an actual airbrush. And the interior of that book was completely in full color. Okay, so we're getting ready to release the book, and we go to the local printer, and we find out that it's quite costly to publish the book in color, okay? However, it's not expensive to print the book in black and white. And this made preeminent sense because we were in the midst of the quote-unquote black and white explosion. So this first issue of Zen, even though it was produced in full color, was printed and published in black and white, okay? And it became a bit of a phenomenon for us, at least, if not for comic book readers, because we got very good orders for the book from the preeminent distributor, which is called Diamond Distribution. And there's still that pretty much to this day. All these many, many decades later, we got about 3,500 orders, which we thought was phenomenal, right? We had no idea. We thought maybe we'd get 100 or something, right? And that kicked off, what we could kind of call the mini industry that Zen became.
You said 3,500 copies was the first sale. And of course, this was pre-internet. You said in mid-'80s.
Yeah.
With your advertising background, did you have a hand in having that amount, that 3,500?
Well, not in the 3,500, but in what happened immediately thereafter, and I'll tell you what that is. So as I mentioned, I owned an advertising agency. Part and parcel of that is being a member of an organization that to this day I'm still a member of. It's called PR Newswire. PR Newswire electronically distributes press releases to all the media, thousands of media points, small newspapers, large newspapers, television, radio, magazines, et cetera, right? And it's a service that companies from, Fortune 500 companies on down use. If you want to get your message out and you want like the editors at the New York Times, the LA Times, Variety, Hollywood Reporter, et cetera, to take notice, it's a paid service, right? So I would be doing this for my clients, right? So I say to myself, okay, so the book gets about 3,500 orders, which is very good. So I say to myself, why don't I utilize my skill in advertising to promote Zen, my comic book? Now, you've seen the cover of Zen, and there was a prose book out around that time, maybe a little earlier, called Communion by an author named Whitley Strieber. Okay? It became a movie. I think Christopher Walken played Strieber. The book was ostensibly about Strieber being like abducted by aliens. Okay? And so it was presented as a true story, right? Which you can believe or not believe depending upon your orientation to things of this nature. But the cover of Communion and the cover of Zen, kind of looks similar. There's this big alien head there. But on Communion, the alien was gray and Zen's blue. Okay, so I decide that I'm going to put out a press release on PR Newswire about my comic book, okay? Even back in that day, I think it cost about $1,200 to put that out. But I had a good feeling about it, as they say, right? So I put out this press release, and the hook, when you have a press release, you need like a hook. In the industry, they call it a USP, like a selling principle, okay? The hook was this. Superman, one of the preeminent comic book characters, he's an alien. He's from the planet Krypton, right? And other than the fact that he's kind of like got blue hair, he looks human. He looks like a human, right? So the hook of the article is, hey, here's a new comic book hero who's also an alien, but looks like and really is an alien, unlike Superman. All right, so when you put out a press release, you never know who's going to pick it up. Okay, just put it out in the ether, okay, and then you see who's going to pick it up. So about 2 weeks later, one of my business associates calls me, says, Steve, go down to the newsstand and pick up USA Today. I go, the entertainment section of USA Today is called the Life section. So I'm going through the paper, And right there, smack on the front page of the Life section, is that cover and the story of Zen. USA Today, the largest selling paper, I think to this day, believe it or not, in the US. The very next day, everything happened. Licensing agents came at me, reporters came at me. Everybody just sparked to the fact that, wow, there's this cool, blue-skinned alien comic book hero who looks like an alien. And had I not done that, I can guarantee you I would not be sitting here with you today.
And again, pre-internet. And so this was a reporter or a journalist who had picked up the sort of through the PR newswire and decided to run with the story.
Yeah.
And did they even call you for comment?
No.
Or no? Wow.
No. It came as a total surprise. Like I said, a business associate just said, you better go get this paper now.
And so then these people found well, you wouldn't have had email then.
No.
So they sent it through, how did they get in touch with you? Agent or the distribution? Sorry, the distribution.
I'm not really sure how people found me, but they sure as heck did.
Wow.
They sure as heck did, right? There was no phone number or anything like that, but they may have reached out to the people at USA Today. I mean, ultimately, Zen was, in the New York Post. He was in Variety, Hollywood, on and on and on. It was just right thing at the right time, serendipity, luck. In life, you need these things if you're going to succeed to one extent or another. And I was fortunate, very fortunate.
Steve, we had a question come in from one of our viewers, Zach6677. And Zach's question is, what are the various methods of designing a comic strip? Is the Marvel method actually recommended?
Okay, that's a heavy-duty question. The Marvel method typically means that the writer just kind of writes a synopsis and that the artist kind of lays the story out, right? And this goes back to Stan Lee and Jack Kirby. Stan, the writer, Jack, basically the artist, although Jack also did write some stuff, right? So the story goes that Stan would give kind of a synopsis, an outline to Jack, and then Jack would lay the whole thing out, and then Stan would just plug the dialogue and the captions in. And I know this for a fact that is correct because I knew Stan Lee. That's another long serendipitous story, by the way. But in any event, there's no one answer to the best way to write a comic book or graphic novel. I could spend hours trying to explain various techniques, whether you start with a synopsis and then hand that to an artist, a la the Marvel style, or do you what DC, the Superman, Batman company, right? The DC method, which is basically the writer writes a full graphic novel script or comic book script and hands it off to the artist. You can't say one method is necessarily superior to the other. It all depends on the people involved.
You said you had an interesting story about meeting Stan Lee?
Oh, yes. So Stan lived on Long Island, where I'm originally from, Long Island, New York, in a town called Hewlett Bay Harbor. And the neighboring town was just Hewlett Bay Harbor. My uncle Sidney owned the only real electronics and appliance store in Hewlett, okay? Leidenheim Electronics. And Stan bought all of his, at the time, he called it hi-fi and stereo equipment from my Uncle Sid, okay? And so guess who would deliver this stuff to Stan's house? Me. So I met him. And very interesting guy. And I told him at one of the times I went over that, I love comic books, I love Marvel books and blah, 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 right? Years and years later, I'm at the University of Miami, okay? And I'm the editor of the University of Miami student magazine called Tempo. And I write to Stan, send me some pictures of yourself. I'm going to write a big article about Marvel Comics. And I do. And Stan really likes the article, and he writes me a letter that I still have to this day to call him to talk to him about writing for Marvel Comics. So I did call him and told him at the time that, well, I got to finish college, and then it looks like I'm getting a scholarship to law school. But so thank you very much, but I can't do it, right? Am I sorry I made that decision? No, because I ended up creating Zen. And had I accepted the job from Stan, I may, then my life would have taken a different course, and I'd maybe be writing issues of the Hulk or Ant-Man or something, right? So you never know. You make a decision at a certain time in life. But I will tell you that something very nice happened. There's a documentary, a really great documentary right now on Disney Plus, because Disney owns Marvel, right? There's a great documentary about Stan Lee on it. So I'm watching it like the day it comes out, right? And Stan is talking in the interview about how the name Marvel came about, how they named it Marvel Comics. So he's talking about it, based on an interview that he had done decades ago. And suddenly, my article, which was headlined "Marvelous" with an exclamation point, shows up on the screen. But more than that, camera pans down and my name stays on the screen for a couple of seconds. And I literally fell out of the chair when I saw this. I knew that Stan loved that article, and he kept it in his archive, and that was in all probability how that article is in the Stan Lee documentary on Disney Plus. So it was very interesting, and I knew Stan. In the later years, I would go to his office in Beverly Hills, and we'd go to lunch at the Nate and Al's, which is like this famous deli that's there, right? And he was a wonderful guy, and it was a blessing to know him. And I feel that a lot of my writing was clearly inspired by Stan's writing.
And you said earlier that, did you kind of kick yourself for not taking up the offer and instead you went to law school? I'm wondering though, do you feel like you always have needed to do your own thing? You've had your own businesses. You still have your own business with your screenplay adaptations with comic books, and creating Zen with Dan. Do you think that that's always been something in your DNA?
Absolutely. Quick story. So I worked for many years at the Singer Sewing Machine Company. They hired me to write the manuals that come with the sewing machine. And by the way, it's a very big company that does a lot of things beyond sewing machines. Furniture, other things you'd be unaware of, most people. So I'm hired and I'm working for Singer Sewing Machine Company. And it's always in the back of my mind that, they could fire me, So you know what I did? I quit. I opened my own ad agency, and I pitched and got the Singer Sewing Machine account. And for a couple of years, they were a major account of mine. But I did this primarily because I always wanted to do my own thing, you know. Not everybody can do their own thing. There's a lot of trials and tribulations attached to that. But that's what I did. And so, yes, you are 100% correct. I'm intransigently independent, and I've been basically working for myself for 40, 50 years now.
Have you been tempted to go, especially in the past, get a job somewhere and say, you know what, this is just easier clocking in for the man, so to speak?
No, that's just not, it's not in my DNA. I've always just wanted to do my own thing. And I mean, what could be, more in that regard than like quitting law school to go write comic book stories in Manhattan for like $50 a story at the time. It's just, I've always just kind of done what I felt I needed to do. Again, it's not for everybody. If everybody did what I did, who would work a lot of jobs in the office?
What's your craziest odd job that you've had?
I was the nighttime clerk at Cumberland Farms, which was in Jersey and New York area, like 7-Eleven back in the day. I don't think they have them here. That was probably the craziest job, yeah. That didn't last terribly long, a couple of months.
Because of all the people that would come in late at night?
Oh yeah, it was a strange milieu, yeah.
Maybe some good writing ideas.
Oh, certainly that, yeah.
If you are writing a story, you may be interested in our new book, the sponsor of today's video. After months of working on a story, have you ever said to yourself, I don't know what my main character wants. Why are my side characters more interesting than my main character? 17 Steps is a workbook-style tool with specific questions to help you dive deep into your main character and story. We've linked up to 17 steps below. Now, back to the video.
What's your creative process like when you're developing a new comic book?
Again, it's very specific to the creator, right? Every great comic book, I feel, just came full-blown out of the mind of whether it's a writer or an artist. And some people are writer/artists. They're few and far between, really. But it's really just your vision. It's kind of probably the same thing as writing a prose novel. You have to have the confidence in your idea. You have to have a true passion and belief in that what you write must get down on paper or electronically now. And I couldn't really give you a roadmap as to how I do it. A lot of stuff comes to you in dreams. A lot of people in the creative process say their subconscious is, preeminent, and it probably is, yeah.
Do you use the same formula for every comic book?
No, every comic book has its own internal formula. I've created, in addition to Zen, I've done other books that I've created, like the frickin' butt-kickin' zombie ants, right? Which couldn't be further from Zen or some of the other books I've created over the years. Everything is just, you get an idea, and so this will be a fun thing to do, and maybe it's an over-the-top comedy like the frickin' butt-kickin' zombie ants. That book came about because I had been reading on the internet that zombie ants are real. These are ants who get infected by a parasite, and it ultimately turns them into zombies and kills them, okay? So I'm reading this on the internet, zombie ants, and I say, how can this not be a comic book? So I had to add frickin' butt kicking to it. And, and that couldn't be further from Zen, okay? So, very dissimilar ideas. And I've also written adaptations of classics, like I wrote a Beowulf graphic novel. I've written a Christmas Carol graphic novel. Those two were published not by my U.S. publisher of like Zen and the Zombie Ants, which is First Comics, but they're published by a British publisher called Marcosia. And the reason I have a relationship with Marcosia was I lived for the entire year of 2007 in London and met the publisher, a great guy, Harry Marcos. And when I met Harry over lunch and told him I wanted to write the Beowulf graphic novel, he snickered a little bit, said, Steve, well, really, this is kind of European stuff, epic poem, you do Zen comic books. I said, Harry, I was an English major in college, and my favorite epic poem was Beowulf, but not just Beowulf, the Seamus Heaney translation of the poem. So, I was kind of forceful, and he was impressed with that, and he let me do it, and it has become a perennial seller for Marcosia since it came out, like, I don't know, 15 years ago, something like that. So yeah, all kinds of different things. I like to do literary stuff. I like to do wild, crazy stuff like the Zombie Ants, and of course, Zen is my mainstay.
How much description do you write when you're starting a comic?
Very little. I don't want to hamstring the artist. To me, the artist is the director of the comic book or graphic novel. I'm just the lowly writer who come up with the script, right? But I don't want to tell the artist how to do everything, what angles to take, in what background to incorporate it. I really want because I've been very fortunate. I've worked with some of the top artists in the industry for a long time now. And I know when you got somebody who's that talented, you don't want to hamstring them. It's just like, they don't want to write, they don't want to do my job, which is write, and I don't want to do their job, which is draw. So my scripts are very sparse. I want the artist to have pretty much free rein.
And is that some advice you would give to someone just starting in comics if they are writing them and they're looking for an illustrator? Don't try to micromanage them too much.
Well, I would give that advice, but I don't know how many people will take it. Again, it's like everybody has their own kind of agenda based upon their experience. So it would be wrong for me to just say, do it that way. They got to do it their way, And, far be it from me to tell them how to do it.
How do you keep the reader turning the page?
Well, that's good storytelling. It's the storytelling, the characterization, the compelling plot. It's kind of like a movie in terms of 3 acts, beginning, middle, and end, right? At the beginning sets the story up, and then there's the inciting incident at the end of the first act where something turns around or compels the hero to travel a certain path, right? And then the middle of the story or the second act is all the complications and the different characters that are encountered in it. And then, of course, the third act is how it all gets resolved. So it's kind of like that. I'm a big fan of the book, The Writer's Journey by Vogler. And that, if you read that book, you can write comics, you can write graphic novels, you can write movies. That to me is like, no better blueprint. The other way you keep the reader turning the page is with great artwork. And that's why in so many cases, the artist is the superstar of the comic book field. Not that because there have been superstar writers like Neil Gaiman, of course, right? And many others. But by and large, comics are a visual medium. So that's why the artists are so preeminent.
Where do you see some of the comics fall short? Is it in the second act, or do you not really, you think it's different? With films, people say, oh, it lagged here, whatever, but with comics, because it's so visual and we come to it because we love the art in most cases, is that not an issue?
Well, the comic book industry and the world of comic books is an amazing world unto itself. So what happens is artists and writers will get a hardcore of fans who will buy virtually anything, budget allowing, that their favorite writers and artists put out. And fans are very forgiving. If they love your work, they'll know that on occasion, you're going to have something that's kind of mediocre, because nobody does excellent stuff all the time, right? So, so whether a fan is following an artist or a writer, if they're a fan, they're going to stick with you unless you do something egregious, which hopefully, I will not do.
We had another viewer write in with a question. This is from Mike Antos, and his question is, how do you end a story that is designed to be serialized?
One of the great things about comics and graphic novels is that someone can die, like Superman. There was the death of Superman. But guess what? A couple issues later, he was back, right? I even did a story called Doomsday for Zen. It was my reaction to the death of Superman, because I knew he was going to come back. You don't kill off Superman, your golden goose, as it were. So the reason I called it Doomsday for Zen was that the name of the bad guy who killed Superman was Doomsday, right? So I have in my story, Doomsday for Zen, Zen is killed. But then, without giving too much away, he comes back to life at the end of the story. That book has sold not only as a, in this case, black and white book that Dan did this intricate pen and ink work for, but it is not only sold in that format, but it was so popular, we turned it into a 3D book. Dan learned how to do 3D. It took him a long time, but I kept telling him, stick with it, Dan, stick with it. And this ends up being one of the best looking, impactful 3D comic books that I've ever seen. And it has a cover, both in the original black and white version and the 3D version, covered by a well-known comic book artist, Sam Keith, who worked on, Wolverine for Marvel and has worked on Batman for DC and had his own creation called The Max, right? So that book, between the great cover art by Sam Keith and Dan's amazing, now 3D inside it, that sells to this day out at all of the comic book conventions, including Comic-Con in San Diego. And what's great is, even though Zen dies in it, it's not what I would call a violent or bloody, gory comic. And kids, of course, also love 3D. So many kids have seen Zen die and come back to life in 3D.
And do you need the 3D glasses?
Yes, the book is sold with the 3D, the old style blue and red lenses.
What are some common mistakes you see in bad comic books?
Well, there's a lot of comics that come out that I can't read. You see, in the comic book industry, especially if you're talking major companies like Marvel and DC, they put out an enormous number of books. And I'm not talking on a monthly or yearly basis. I'm talking on a weekly basis. you go to your local comic book store, you'll probably see around 50 new books a week. What that means is there's an insatiable need for product. And when you are doing something almost on like a mass production basis, you know, and you have a really strict deadline, that can produce, you know, far from an optimal book. So, you know, I can't fault any of my fellow writers who are making their livelihood by producing books, or fault artists. They've got to get the book done on schedule. When you're working for a publisher that's putting out from, you know, 25 minimum new books a week, it's a process. And, you know, you have to be a little forgiving for people who have to meet that deadline.
So maybe before there was a richness to the story or to the drawings, and it's a little too formulaic now?
Well, some people say that. Some people say that there's a lot of things going on in the industry. Some people say that comics are too woke now. That's a term, okay? And other people believe that it's important to have a lot of more inclusiveness in comics, with more ethnic characters, lots of women characters. The new Marvel movie, Marvels, has 3 female superheroes in it. So, you know, when you have two, okay, the 2 major comic book companies, Marvel is owned by Disney. They bought it for $4 billion with a B dollars several years ago. And so you have Marvel being owned by Disney. And the DC Comics, Superman, Batman, Wonder Woman, has been owned for decades by Warner Brothers. So when you have 2 of the largest global media companies that own the 2 large comic book companies, you can just figure that, you know, whatever these companies feel is appropriate in today's marketplace, they're going to do. So comics have changed drastically since when I was a kid and fell in love with comics by reading my first issue of Superboy. I guess I felt I was Superboy or something, right? It was like love at first sight. I remember opening that book, which my parents bought for me, just to keep me amused or occupied, and something went off in my head. And I was maybe 7 years old, and here I am, all these decades later, and this is what I do.
What mistakes do beginners make with panels?
Well, that's, again, these are great questions because there's no easy answer. Now, when you say beginners, if you're talking about a beginning writer, one major mistake could be putting too much on a page. I'm of the firm belief that a book should look cinematic. In order to do that, if you exceed 5 or 6 panels on a page, it's just going to look like a jumble of artwork. Plus, you have to overlay the word balloons over that. So if you have a page that's got like 8 panels on it, and there have been pages with 8 panels, plus a healthy amount of dialogue, to me, that's not the way to do a book. Now, the interesting thing is way back in the day, like in what they call the golden age of comics, a lot of books looked like that. They had maybe 8, 10 panels on a page and loaded with dialogue, which just forced you to read it and, you know, dig into it. But as time has gone by, comics are now essentially like movies on paper, graphic novels as well. Saying graphic novel is nothing more than a thick comic book, as it were, a book-size comic, okay, in any genre. It's not just superheroes, obviously. So one mistake is putting too much on a page, and that mistake can be fatal to a comic.
So if it's too cluttered, too many panels, too much dialogue, too many pictures, it loses its appeal somehow?
Well, to me it does, yeah. Yeah, and I think to most people.
Yeah, I was happy to see a local library had a graphic novel section. I guess I hadn't been there in a while, and it was pretty neat. And I thought that was pretty
Sure.
cool.
Well, actually, if you go to a bookstore like Barnes & Noble, the graphic novel section, by and large, in any bookstore, is the most growth-filled section that there is. It's just burgeoning. Because a lot of people also believe, in terms of talking about librarians, that comics and graphic novels are great for what they term reluctant readers. You know, kids who have a hard time diving into a page of prose are often more inclined to want to read a comic book or a graphic novel. Yeah.
What mistakes do writers make with structure?
Well, I mean, again, you know, I can't speak for everybody. You know, basically, I really feel I can only speak for myself. But again, I would say when it comes to structure, if you just follow the 3-act structure and read Vogler's book, that's the best advice I could give anybody.
I'm just curious, what country reveres comics the most?
Well, the U.S. It's a U.S. Phenomenon. They say jazz and comic books are quintessentially American art forms.
Interesting. Because I wasn't sure if at one time comics were, you know, just based on some documentaries I watched, they were looked down on, they were thought of as dissident, deviant sort of, you know, it could be at times propaganda or whatever.
Oh, yeah.
But it seems like now that's totally negated.
Well, it's sort of like, remember marijuana, right?
Sure.
You know, how that was banned, and there was a famous movie about that. I forget the name at the moment. You know, but this evil drug, right?
Sure.
Well, the same thing happened with comics. There was a congressional panel about comics. They called it Seduction of the Innocent.
Right.
And it was about the horror and the sexual innuendo and whatnot in comic books that was rotting out the minds of youngsters. As a result of all of that, a self-policing entity called the Comics Code Authority was created so that this seal with a big A in it was on the cover of every published comic book, which meant that the comic book companies had to prove to Congress that all of their comics were suitable for young minds. So, but now you have comic books with different ratings on them, where you'll find cuss words and everything and more sexual content, but it's clearly delineated on the cover of every book, if it's for youngsters, for teens, only for mature readers. But the comics have gone through a lot of turmoil. But then again, what in America hasn't and continues to?
We had a question come in from our viewer Ernesto Caro, and Ernesto writes, "My biggest curiosity is the pacing of the story. I'm a screenwriter and I love comics, but I couldn't even imagine how to pace a comic book in regard to dialogue versus action per page."
Okay. Now, in order for me to answer this question, I need to talk a little bit about this company I established 10 years ago, actually in 2011. So back in 2011, it was quite clear to me that there was a real nexus between graphic novels and comics on the one hand and film and animation on the other. By which I mean to say more and more movies were being based on comic books and graphic novels. For example, most people are familiar with the movie Road to Perdition. What most people don't know is that started its life as a graphic novel. It was written by a well-known mystery novelist, Max Allan Collins, and it was taken to Hollywood by a fellow named Ken F. Levin, who is also the publisher and founder of First Comics that publishes Zen, okay? And so I knew that there was a real connection between movies and comic books. And so I came up with this concept of a company that is called Storyboard Graphic Novels. And it essentially says to screenwriters, but also producers, directors, and actors, give us your screenplay and we'll turn it into a graphic novel or a comic book series. And this brings up the answer to your viewer's question. What happens is this, okay, after we sign a contract and we were on board with a screenwriter who, say, has a 100-page screenplay, okay, what happens is I read the screenplay and I start thinking about an appropriate artist for the genre of the book. Is superhero? Is it rom-com? Is it horror? Is it sci-fi, right? At the same time I'm doing that, I personally write the adaptation, the graphic novel adaptation. Many of my fellow writers in the industry have asked me, hey Steve, could I write some of these adaptations for you? Thus far, I've personally written every adaptation, which is over 80 of them since 2011. It's probably closer to 100 now. The reason I do that is I always invoke this quote from Liam Neeson in the movie Taken. Do you remember when he said, I have a particular set of skills? Well, I do. I have a particular set of skills. I know how to take a movie script and convert it into a graphic novel script. And some of the things that relate to that are, you know how there's a page of a screenplay is equivalent to a minute on the screen. Well, a page of a screenplay is equivalent to a page and a third in a graphic novel. In other words, it takes more than one page of a screenplay to get it into a graphic novel. It's going to be like a page and a third. And this algorithm, if you want to call it, has proved correct for like dozens and dozens of books. So, you know, I came up with that algorithm and it works, right? But in terms of the pacing and what your viewer asked, you have to know how to take a screenplay which is written for the fluid medium of film and turn it into a script for the static medium of a comic book or graphic novel. Because a book is static. It's panel after panel after panel after panel. It's called sequential art, okay? And this is something, because I've done it so frequently, I know how to do it. And part and parcel of that is also knowing things like how to keep a page cinematic by not only not overburdening it with too many panels, but just as important is how many words you can put on a page. How many word balloons maximum can go in a panel. So these are all like formulas, if you will, to ensure that the story moves along at the right pace, is still cinematic looking, and isn't overburdened by text, which is word balloons and captions. So again, to explain how to do this, would be tantamount to explaining how to write a movie script, right? And that's something that we don't have enough time to discuss here.
Oh, sure. But I'm curious, as a rule, how many word balloons are considered sort of the standard acceptable per panel?
2 or 3. But it all depends how many words are in each balloon. When you get into like a soliloquy or a monologue, you may have to divide up what the character is saying into like 4 panels. Because there's also like a maximum number of words you can put in a balloon, which is like 12 if you really must know, right? These are all formulas that I've worked out, right? And yeah, so pacing, characters, cinematic nature, how much dialogue to put in. It's an art and a science.
That's great information. Thank you. I'm going to start really like noticing that. I think I'll start when I look at comics. I'm going to really take notice of because maybe to the amateur, pointing to myself, I wouldn't totally notice if it's too cluttered. Like I'll just notice something's off, but I won't know why.
Right.
Yeah. How many written pages is a comic book? Is there a standard?
Well, I mean, comic books today typically are 20 pages of story. There's the 20-page stories. There's also a new movement to have thicker comics, like almost double size, like 40-page books. So today a book is either maybe around 20 pages or around 40 pages. But when you say written, a script that I will write for a comic, it's pretty much like 1 for 1. A 20-page comic might take about 20 pages of script.
How long does it take you to write a comic book?
The answer to that is as long as it takes. There's no strict answer. Sometimes, you can get up in the morning, your subconscious has been working, you sit down at the computer, and within an hour or 2, you've got the script. Then again, you can have some writer's block or some issues you can't quite resolve that quickly, and it could take a month. Again, there's really no definitive answer to that.
Do you find personally, though, that you're better in the morning or maybe a certain time in the afternoon?
Well, I'm not a morning person, okay? And I'm kind of erratic, to be honest with you. Because I've been in business for myself for so long, I have to set my own schedule. And as a result, if there's a deadline coming up, I'll get it done because I have no option. So the answer, unfortunately, is there's no easy answer.
We had another question come in from Lone Gamer 6332. The biggest issue for aspiring comic writers is trying to find an artist.
Yeah, finding an artist. Well, I have to mention this in the context of my company, and I'll tell you why. When I started Storyboard Graphic Novels, I knew I was going to need a roster of really talented artists, but who had not only the talent, but a good work ethic, and preferably could exist on a pay scale that is not typical for what companies like Marvel and DC pay. Because if I were to offer to my potential clients a page rate that Marvel and DC pay to their pros, I wouldn't be able to have many clients, right? So what I did, and this could be instructive to people looking for artists, is I surveyed the world for artists. Because in many foreign countries to the US, the exchange rate can be quite favorable, so that paying an artist, say in the Philippines, a rate that no American artist could sustain themselves on, could actually sustain a whole family in a foreign country. And the beauty part of this is that there are artists in other countries, Philippines, for example. For some reason, these people have the most amazing eye. They're phenomenal artists. And the page rate that I can offer them, so I can offer my clients a reasonable page rate, is great for them. So they're very happy. So one thing one can do is look for artists, you know, in Indonesia, Philippines, even like Portugal, Italy. So that can become very important. Artists in the U.S., you know, are used to and need a higher page rate than, you know, a person trying to put together their own book may be able to afford.
You said something interesting, talent and work ethic.
Yeah.
Do you find those go together?
Not necessarily. There are some wildly talented people who can only produce on a very slow basis. And that doesn't work in any comic book industry, unless, you know, you're just doing a book at your leisure and you don't care if it takes 5 years to come out. So work ethic is very important. And, you know, I'm currently, for example, producing over a dozen books for people. And I have to monitor this progress every day. And although we don't set, you know, onerous deadlines, they're still deadlines. And so work ethic becomes important if you want to get a book out in a reasonable amount of time, yeah.
But what if someone says, look, what I do can't be rushed?
Then so be it. I've had people that I've worked with either on my own books or books for clients who ultimately said that, and either something was renegotiated or they left the project. Yeah, you know, because you can't rush somebody if they can't be rushed.
We had another comment come in from Carlos Mans, and Carlos writes, I'm an illustrator/artist. What I find difficult, or what actually makes a difference, is having synergy with the writer, parentheses, a good match or flow. There needs to be an underestimated value in co-creation. Doesn't need to be one direction, writing then drawing, but actually can retrofit both ways and improve both parts with creativity and fun, especially in an industry where the money, if any, comes later.
Well, that's a very well thought out statement, and I agree with it totally. If there's great synergy between the writer and the artist, that's optimal. And an artist can contribute more than just the art. Sometimes, like it's often said that Jack Kirby contributed more than just the art to the early Marvel comics. So yeah, it's all a synergy, and it all depends. Some artists just want to be given a definitive script and write and draw it, okay? Others want to be more proactive, and they have ideas, which are good. And if those ideas can mesh with those of the writer, then it's great. They don't always mesh. It's almost like anything in life. You know, you meet a person, that person has their agenda, you have your agenda, and whether or not it's all going to work, you don't know until you try it.
Sure. And like a director and their DP or something like, yeah.
And I often tell my clients at Storyboard that the director is the artist. And sometimes a client might want to, quote unquote, micromanage an artist, which some artists take abrasion to, okay? Other clients are more than happy to just let the artist interpret the script as written, okay? It just seems to me, in my experience in life, and not just in comics and graphic novels, is that everybody's got their own set of ideas on how to do things. You're probably not going to convince people to go your way, right? But you can work with people, you can compromise and come up with something that everybody likes.
Sure, and going back to the cliche saying in film, which is there's the movie you write, there's the movie you film, and then there's the movie that's actually edited and produced. So I'm sure it's exactly the same with comics.
Exactly, exactly.
What should a comic book creator look for in an artist?
Someone whose vision jives with theirs. In other words, if you have an idea of what a comic book should look like that you're trying to create, there has to be something simpatico with your artist. If the artist draws your character in, say, a comedic way that is not your intent, then it's not going to work. The meeting of minds between an artist and a writer is a very ephemeral thing. Sometimes it works off the bat, sometimes it never works, sometimes they compromise. But, you have to like an artist's work. So, for example, when a screenwriter or a producer or a director gives me a screenplay, and I read it, and I get a sense of, say, 2 or 3 artists who seem appropriate to bring the project to life, what I do is I simply show them samples from the 3 artists. I say, well, which one do you like? Sometimes, I'd say about 1/3 of my clients, whether they're screenwriters, directors, actors, whatever, they've been reading comic books forever, right? They're big fans. So I simply say to them, whose art do you like? Do you like Alex Ross's art? Do you like Sam Keith's art? Do you like Jay Lee's art? Et cetera, Mike Mignola's art. And they say, oh yeah, I really love Mr. X. Well, then that gives me a good clue as to an artist that will please them. Even if I don't think that's exactly the right artist fit for the project, but if a writer likes a particular artist, I try to find somebody who, is in that wheelhouse for them.
And what about temperament? Because that, someone can be great at either writing or art, but if the personality styles differ, do you kind of know that, or maybe that just comes out over time?
Lots of times writers and artists never meet. They have very little contact other than the production of the book. Again, everybody's different. Dan Cody and I are different people. I can rattle off a number of artists I've worked with, and we're all different people. But if you admire and respect that person's talent, that's key.
What are some advantages and disadvantages of having a publisher?
Wow, okay. Comic book publishers, I don't want to say this categorically, but I will. They're in business to get movie and TV deals. You can make some money publishing a book, but the real money is in doing deals for film and TV. It's incalculable different. And also licensing, very important. So film, TV, licensing is where the real money comes. And so, for example, Ken Levin, who founded First Comics, my personal publisher, back in the day, Ken founded First Comics as what's called a creator-owned company. What this means is as follows. Marvel and DC own all their characters. They own Spider-Man, right? They own Superman, Batman, Captain Marvel, etc. So when you get published, the only way you get published through Marvel or DC is if you're writing or drawing stories based on their characters, and it's a work for hire, you know, they pay you X amount, you draw, you write. Creator-owned books, like the ones that First Comics and some other companies publish, they're still, those characters that you create, like Zen, is still owned by Dan and I, right? But what Ken, as a publisher, can do, and what Harry Marcos, my UK publisher of Marcosia, can do, and it's incorporated into the publishing contract, is they can take your property and sell it as a movie, as a TV show, for example, right? And those deals are what's really lucrative. So for example, when I, with a director friend, wrote the latest incarnation of the Zen live action movie script, that goes into Ken's hands because he's like de facto, he's my manager as well. That's part and parcel of the deal for these kind of scenarios. So it can be very important to have a publisher. Lots of people just try to self-publish, which is fine. Like they'll put their books up on Amazon and sell it both as a hard copy and digitally, like, you know, read it on the Kindle, right? But, you know, when you're in that position, you have to determine, what are you trying to do? Are you just trying to sell some books? Do you want to get a movie deal? Do you want to get a TV deal? Do you want to get licensing? You know, this is the maze you go through when Hollywood gets involved, right? So it's very advantageous to me, like, and to some of my clients. For example, I did a book, a horror story, for a client who's like a writer and a director named Philip Landa, okay? And the book, which Marcosia published, is called Shepherd. And based on that book, Phil got a movie deal, and it was shot. The movie, you can see it wherever it's posted on, it's called Shepherd, right? But that came about primarily as a result of there being a graphic novel, right? We've also done books, for example, Mark Roberts, he created the TV show Mike and Molly. I think Melissa McCarthy, that was her big starring vehicle. And before that, he was one of the head writers, if not the head writer, for years on one of my favorite sitcoms, 2.5 Men. So we adapted a stage play that he wrote called Rantoul and Die, Rantoul. It's the name of a town, Rantoul and Die, which is this incredible black comedy, dark comedy, right? And we adapted the stage play into a graphic novel, right? But you know, Mark has his own agents, you know, like maybe it's CAA or William Morris, I don't really know where, okay? So he can move his products through his connections. So whether you self-publish, in which case you're out there fending by yourself against the world, or you can get a publisher like First Comics or Marcosia or some of the others, like Image is a big one, and Dark Horse, okay? So if you get an established publisher, they can take your, and will take your product and attempt to sell it in these other media, okay? So these are the various ways one can go.
Do you think so many young creators, though, they see all this IP out there, but they don't realize that the initial character, the initial story has to be special, has to be something that audiences will resonate with, that they just want to rush to the video game, the movie, the products?
Yeah, and that'll get you nowhere fast, right? I mean, I'm sure there are the rare occasions where somebody comes up with an idea and they rush putting it together and it turns into a success. I'm unaware of them, but they probably exist, but probably in small number, right? There's no, I think the key in wanting to produce your own comic or graphic novel, you have to have the passion for it. Like, I've been obsessed with comics since I was a kid. I don't even know why. It just happened, right? So if you're obsessed with comics and graphic novels and you have a story you want to tell, you'll get it done one way or another. You'll find an artist, or you'll find me, and you'll, one way or another, get it published, whether it's self-published or you'll pitch it to a publisher. There's no one set blueprint or pathway as to how to make this happen.
How much does it cost to typically produce an independent comic?
Well, here's what I can tell you. Marvel and DC, the two big comic book companies, when they pay their creative team on any book, which is writer, penciler, inker, colorist, letterer, the 5 essential people, those two companies, which are admittedly giant companies, they pay the going rate of $500 a page. Okay? To pay those 5 people, that's what it costs. Okay? So the average, a 20-page book, you do the math, it's 20 times 500. I think that's $10,000. That's what it costs them to produce a 20-page book. Again, as I mentioned earlier, because I use super talented people, but people who don't necessarily reside in the U.S., I pay them, like, my total combined page rate is a fraction of that. But I can tell you this. There's one artist, an alumni, if you will, of Storyboard, is an artist who lives in Mexico. His name is Enid Balam. He did a beautiful major project for us, and he is now a top artist at Marvel. They saw his work, and he's working on some high-profile titles for them. Like, there's one coming out called Spider-Gwen, which is probably Gwen Stacy, who was a girlfriend-ish of Peter Parker's, who's now got spider powers, right? And there's talk of a movie with some big actress gonna be, but Enid, who cut his teeth on Storyboard as well as, I guess, other projects, he's doing that book.
That's great.
He also does like New Mutants, which is an X-Men kind of spin-off, or in that wheelhouse, right? So I guarantee you what he's making now from Marvel is like 3 to 5 times what I paid him. But when, at the time, I can't bend somebody's arm to sign a contract with me. So he was very happy, and the exchange rate was good with Mexico. But we have had artists who have now moved up, and he's not the only one. Yeah.
What advice would you give to someone who's looking to get a comic book published?
The advice would be this. Go to a comic book convention, of which there are many. I believe currently every weekend somewhere in the United States there's a comic book convention. The biggest one is, of course, Comic-Con in San Diego, where they're pushing at 200,000 people who attend. I call Comic-Con in San Diego the 5-day endurance test. I always need a week afterwards to recover when I get back, right? But whether you go to Comic-Con, or last week I was at LA Comic-Con, but they're in Florida, New York Comic-Con, everywhere. So go, approach publishers with your portfolio. If you're a writer, give them a printout of something you've written. If you're an artist, show them your art portfolio. The best way to see if you might have what it takes or somebody sparks to your talent is to go to what's called a portfolio review that they have at almost every comic book convention. And and these people are unsparing. If they think your work is not that good, they'll tell you why it's not that good. Constructive criticism, not, just for the sake of being critical, right? But there's no better way to judge and to find out where your work stands than to show it to professionals who are sitting behind those booths or at that portfolio review table. That's the way to do it.
How did you get started in licensing?
As I mentioned earlier, we get this enormous publicity in USA Today. Within a day or two, I get calls from a number of licensing agents. The only one whose name I'll mention is the guy I went with, which was Mark Friedman, who had a company, it's still in existence, called Surge Licensing. Mark, a few months earlier, had sparked to and picked up a little account called the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. And they rode that everywhere because, the cartoons, the movies, all the licensing, right? And Mark said to me, Steve, I really like Zen. Would you like me to be your licensing agent? And I was pitched by a few others, but I liked Mark, and he was from Long Island in New York, so we had that kind of bond. And went with Mark, and for several years he handled all the licensing, and that thus became the 2 video games from Konami, which was the Game Boy and the NES game, Nintendo Entertainment System, and the Just Toys and the vinyl model kits and the pens, pencils, notebooks, Halloween masks, chromium cards, phone cards, and probably a few dozen other things I cannot remember, okay? So that was fortunate, but again, this is why I say, had I not placed that press release through PR Newswire, and had it not been picked up by USA Today, and had not Mark seen it and contacted me, you see, this is life, so you either react to these things or you don't.
What do you look for in licensing deals?
Well, you want something that represents your character, your book. Now, there's an interesting nuance to this, which is at the time that Zen got this publicity, the environmental movement was very hot. And when we spoke to the folks at Konami, and when we spoke to the folks like at the toy company, they desperately wanted a property that was environmentally themed. Zen was not initially environmentally themed, okay? He was a mercenary in outer space. But we were presented with this business opportunity. And as a result, Dan and I huddled with a creative team, and we turned Zen into an environmentally themed property, which ended up being very successful for us. In the ensuing years, some people have said, but Steve, so you took advantage of a business opportunity to make money. You took a property that had nothing to do with the environment and turned it into something that had a lot to do with the environment. And all I can unabashedly say is yes, we did it because we had a business opportunity. We were very much into the environmental movement anyway, so I don't rue the fact that we did it. I'll always have some high-level detractors who shall remain nameless in the comic book industry. Said, Stern, he just did that as a money grab. What can I say? I'm proud of what we did. A lot of people loved what we did. And so that becomes something, again, you know, when you're given a business opportunity, you have to personally decide morally, financially, otherwise, if it's something you want to pursue.
Sure, and anytime there's success in music, film, whatever, there's always going to be the ones yelling, selling out.
Oh yeah.
And that and that usually only comes at a certain level.
Yeah.
So we'll just leave it at that, and people can make their own decisions.
Absolutely.
When it comes to licensing, what do you avoid?
Well, a bad deal, something that doesn't relate in any way to what you want to do with your character, right? I'm sure if, you know, with Zen, you know, to me, he's basically a family-friendly concept. In fact, we call him intergenerational because so many of our fans now have their own kids, and when they come to the conventions, they bring the kid in the stroller and they get the kid their first Zen comic, right? So you know, you know, I'm not into like real edgy stuff. I'm just trying to tell a good story that pretty much anybody, man, woman, young, old, can read. So what I avoid is content. There have been some, you know, deals that were proffered to us that we did not take for reasons of that nature.
Is it possible to have too many licensing deals?
Well, I suppose we had a lot. Overkill, maybe? I don't know. I mean, we never got to a point where I felt we had too many, because what you try to do is you try to get them in different categories, okay? And you can't have competitive. If you're going to go with one video game company, you know, that's it. They're all kind of exclusive, right? So I think it just depends on what your feeling level is, that you've covered the various categories that, you know, give your fans the opportunity to, you know, like collect a plush toy, to buy a collectible comic book, to play a video game. And if you go on YouTube, where you are, there's several dozen videos of people playing and reviewing the Zen video games, which were considered very forward thinking for their time.
We imagine you've been approached by many people that want to partner with you and Zen. What distinguishes people who you end up working with versus those that you don't?
Well, again, I guess it's like anything in business. You have to trust the people. You have to it'd be nice to like the people. You don't have to like everybody in life. You have to feel they're honest. And so things tend to usually work out as you have a dialogue. And you can't work with everybody, and everybody can't work with you. And then there, you know, can be financial considerations, like I may have wanted to hire, say, an artist for a particular book, and that artist is either too expensive or unavailable. It's kind of like, you know, I kind of call artists like the A-listers in my industry. And it's like, you know, when you try to get an actor, an A-list actor, say you want Brad Pitt or Leonardo DiCaprio to star in a film, A, they may be too expensive for you, and or B, they just may not be available. So all of these factors kind of play in.
Steve, with Zen, I know you've had success with the action figures and the video games. There were other deals in the works. Did they happen? And where would Zen be today had they happened?
Right, okay. When it came to live action film or animated TV, in both instances, we've had option deals on them, but the product didn't happen. We were twice optioned for film. And the film had a director attached, a fellow named Brian Usna, who was best known for a Reanimator, okay? And so we publicized that. We publicized the fact that there was a movie coming. A pretty well-known at the time screenwriter was hired by the production company, and he wrote the screenplay. So we would put on the back of some of our comics a promotion about the upcoming movie, and then the movie didn't happen for various and sundry reasons. Hollywood is a really intricate system, and not everything that gets proposed happens. So that movie with Usna attached didn't happen at the last moment. And then there was a China-based company called Eight Celestials that also optioned Zen for a film, live action film, and was talking to people like Steven Seagal, who apparently had some interest in playing Zen. At least that's my understanding. But that didn't happen at the last moment either, okay? Same thing happened with animated television series. An old line, very established company named Ruby Spears optioned Zen for an animated, like, Saturday morning series, and we advertised it in trades like the Hollywood Reporter, and then Ruby Spears went out of business before they could produce the show. Okay, and so these things happen. Okay, but what's nice, you could say, about these things, and as I spoke about serendipity and believing that things happen when they're supposed to happen, what this means is that now there still remains a good possibility that there could be both a Zen live action film and an animated series. I've written, along with a director friend of mine, we've written a brand new live action film script, and I can tell you a little bit later what's happening with that. And we've also been approached by a couple of animation companies, one based in Canada and one here, relative to a Zen animated series. So what didn't happen then may happen now, and it gives me something to look forward to. It's in a way, I'm not unhappy that it didn't happen yet, because one always needs a goal, and that's the only thing that Zen really hasn't achieved is getting on the screen, big or small.
What lessons can you share from that, of deals almost happening, going away? It seems like that's part of anyone's quote-unquote entertainment journey.
Yeah. Well, don't be disappointed if it doesn't happen. And of course I was a couple of times. I had 3 instances, right? And, that makes you feel not happy. But ultimately, I came to the realization that something happens when it's meant to happen, And so I can't tell you if the current activity will turn into a film and or animated series, but I'm enjoying the ride of finding that out. So, and I can talk to you a little bit about where those things are at if you want to know.
Well, I'm just curious too, do you think that mindset, because that's a great mindset where you kind of keep it loose and you're not so, rigid with one idea. You think that's been a part of your longevity, because you haven't gotten frustrated and said, I'm not doing this anymore?
Yeah, well, I've had some severe ups and downs in my life. I was married for 22 years, and for 12 of them, my wife had multiple sclerosis, which eventually took her life. And when something like that happens, and you survive it, you kind of get a new outlook on life, which is, hey, I'm not in control here. I am not in control here. But if you want to survive, you must keep ultimately, a positive. After grieving, you have to keep a positive attitude. So when life throws you those lemons, you got to try to make the proverbial lemonade.
You've sold 3 million comics and novels?
Yeah, probably more than that now.
How is that possible?
Well, you need a popular book. We did a 6-issue run with the Archie Company based upon the content of the video games and the toys with the environmental theme that I referred to. So that added a large number of books to the number of books we have in print. But we did something else too, because I was kind of entrepreneurial about this. And we also got what back in the day was called newsstand distribution. By which I mean to say there are Zen books from 20, 30 years ago you can see that have a particular type of barcode on them, like a UPC code. And what that means is we applied for what was necessary to have newsstand distributors carry our book. And that went on for a year or two, and that vastly increased the number of books we sold. So we did a couple of things that allowed us to sell a lot more books than a typical independently published book could do.
And unfortunately, newsstands, it seems like, have gone away just as bookstores have.
Well, I question the demise of newsstands. I stopped at a bookstore today, and in the front is a newsstand, and it had literally several hundred different magazines there. If you go to a Barnes & Noble, they have a huge newsstand section, okay? And at the bookstore I was at today, there was a very interesting sign posted that basically said, the death of print has been highly exaggerated. And go to any Barnes & Noble, you'll see a large newsstand section. So yes, the death of print has been highly exaggerated.
And especially too with a comic book, and just having that tactile experience, the way it smells, the feel of the paper.
Oh yeah, and Wednesday is called New Comics Day. What that means is every Wednesday, without fail, like clockwork, the store owner puts out the new comics. And as I had mentioned, there's at least 50 to 100 new books every week. Every week. So yeah, somebody's buying these books.
How hard is it to sell comic books?
Oh, infinitely hard, because since there are so many new books coming out every week, you've got to have something special about your book. You also need to pretty much be a beast on social media, because, as a past advertising professional, the truth is social media is today's primary mode of advertising. This is why Meta gives you the opportunity to boost your Instagram posts or advertise and Google ads and all these things. So in order to get the word out, you've got to do social media. The good part is social media is technically free. You put out a post, it doesn't cost you anything. But if you want to boost the post, then it's going to cost you. And I'll just give you a little piece of inside information. Instagram is used a lot for this, right? When you boost a post on Instagram, well, when you put out a post on Instagram, not even boost it, it will only go to about 10% of your followers. So let's say you've got 1,000 followers on Instagram. We'll just use Instagram. When you put out a post, about 100 people only will see it. This is done as a business ploy. If you want all of your 1,000 people to see it, you're going to have to pay some money to Mark Zuckerberg. Okay, but this is the new form of advertising, and whether you're doing it on Twitter, which again is very problematical these days because of all the things going on, or Instagram, or Facebook, or Threads, which and you want to boost, it's going to cost you, but that's advertising. And again, why do I bring this all up? Because you've got to get the word out of what you're doing. And of course, there's TikTok too.
Sure. And there's just a modern form of pay to play. I mean, I'm sure movie distributor, movie houses and bands.
Right.
In LA, there was always that dilemma of pay to play.
Yeah.
These different, venues.
So true. Here. So true.
Sure. So it going back to the cliche, it takes money to make money, but also to get your message out. So, what are some secrets to selling comic books?
Secrets?
Yeah. That you can divulge.
Wow. Are there any secrets? Well, if by that you mean how you can guarantee selling some books, first of all, get a hot artist. But that will cost you, and could cost you dearly, because the artists know if an artist has a following, it's going to cost you to get that person to work on your book. But a little trick, here's a secret, just get that artist to do a cover for you. When you can't afford a big name artist to do a whole book, you may well be able to get them to do a cover. And there are people who collect artists. And if they know that Mr. X is doing a cover, or what's called an alternate cover, a variant cover for you on your comic or graphic novel, many of that artist fans will buy that book for no other reason that they're completists and must have that artist's cover. So that's the biggest secret I could divulge.
That's interesting. I didn't know that. I'm wondering then, for the inside, the interior drawings, then you're getting someone that theoretically costs less?
Yeah.
Okay, wow.
Yeah. Not theoretically, that does cost less, because the big name guys may well do you a cover. I'm not saying it'll be cheap. I mean, it could cost you $1,000. But the question is, if I spend $1,000 on this hot artist, I may well sell 5,000 more comics.
Why do you say that the most talented people are usually more soft-spoken and humble?
Yeah, because they're secure. If you are secure in your talent and in yourself as a human being, you don't need to overblow your importance to the world, right? It's just a matter of having an ego that's under control. In the comic book world, there is a bit of an ego problem on a certain percentage of the people who once they start selling a lot of books and have all these people lined up for them at the comic book conventions to get their signature, it can go to your head. I would say that happened to me a bit, but way back in the day, like when Zen was really riding high, like in the early 1990s, and I could attend virtually any comic book convention, do an appearance in any comic book store, and have people lined up and crazy things happening, like little kids coming up to me with like $300 in cash to get an issue of, a rare issue of Zen, but which I would never take unless I saw that their parents were there condoning the transaction. So things like that, can go to your head. They probably did to mine for a period of a year or so, but then, that fades, that goes away. But so I would just say, stay humble and realize that what you're doing is great. because you're providing entertainment and pleasure to people. But, get a grip on yourself. You're just another human being who works in a particular industry.
And success just comes in waves, and it can go away. And when the waves have maybe come down a bit and then come back up for you, is there something you tell yourself, like, okay, we don't know how long anything lasts?
Well, it's true in life, yeah. Everything's impermanent. And I've had, the vast success periods and then the low-key periods, but persistence. Calvin Coolidge said that the most important thing in life is persistence. And I agree with Calvin, because if you love what you're doing and believe in what you're doing, you will keep doing it whether you're in a feast period or a famine period, because you love what you do. And that does keep you humble.
Drive or talent? Which do you see most successful people have?
Well, I've heard that either one can work. I believe it's best to have a combination of both. I have some God-given talent, okay, whatever it is. But I also had the drive and the persistence, and that's why Zen has been around for 36 years and counting. So, you have to have enough talent to put something out there that the public wants to read and collect, right? But if you don't have the business acumen, the drive, if you will, to know how to maintain the property or whatever it is you're doing, if you don't have a combination of those two things, I don't think you can ultimately succeed.
How many times has the comic book business gone away and come back? Or maybe it's never gone away?
Oh, well, it's had its low periods. Marvel was sold several times to various companies when they were on hard times. The thing is this, back in the day, in the heyday of comic books, I'm talking what's called the golden age, like 60-ish years ago, a typical comic book could sell 1 million copies. That was not unusual, okay? Now, if a comic book sells 20,000 copies, it's considered quite successful, right? So there's been highs and lows in the industry. Right now, there's a feeling that the books put out by the big two companies, Marvel and DC, are getting kind of repetitive. But there's a lot of independent books that come out every week as well. So it's kind of a mixed bag today. But what's been helpful to the industry is the digital revolution, because lots of people we don't have quantifiable numbers because Amazon, for example, doesn't, those proprietary numbers, they don't tell you how many people are downloading or reading digitally comic books, but the belief is it's a growing number. A lot of people, more old school like myself, want that physical book, right? But there's a lot of young people now who may have never purchased a physical book, but they read everything online. So, that's been sort of a resurgence for the industry. And there's no indicators that this industry is going away, because more and more movies and shows, TV shows, streaming, media. Key to know is this: we are in the golden age for content creators. Why? 2 words: streaming media. If you go to Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu, Disney, Peacock, Paramount, on and on, they have an insatiable need for content. just like the comic book store has like 50 to 100 new books every week, you know from your own experience how many new shows come out every week. If you combine all the new shows that come out every week on all the streaming media, it could be, again, I'm sure it's 50 to 100, maybe more. So this means that people who create content have more potential opportunity to sell what they do than they ever have before in human history.
Should a comic book writer follow trends?
I don't think a writer of any sort should follow trends. That's a way to guarantee that, you know, whatever you're writing is going to be gone shortly. Follow your own lights. Do what you like. If what you like happens to fall into a trend, then so be it. But to think that you're going to pick up like Taylor Swift, she's huge right now, to do a Taylor Swift comic book, which some company has done, just to maybe sell copies to her fans, you know, that's something I'm not going to do. I've never really followed trends, but that's me. If somebody's going to follow a trend, you're not going to disabuse them of doing it. Where they're going to end up, I have no idea.
Did anybody talk you out of Zen in the beginning, when you met Dan, before you met Dan? Did someone say, this is never going to work, and you didn't listen to that?
Oh yeah, I don't listen to anybody but myself. I'll take advice, but I got to be honest with you. There were people who told me that I shouldn't try to do storyboard graphic novels, that, you know, that it wasn't a quote unquote good business model, that screenwriters, producers, directors, actors weren't going to be inclined to give me screenplays to turn them into books. If I had followed that advice, that company would not exist, and it's going into its like 12th year with somewhere between 80 and 100 books done already. So, you know, believe in yourself. Believe in yourself.
So just as you've shared about those ups and downs, peaks and valleys with success, there's also 100 people tell you it can't be done.
I think, yeah, and no matter what it is you do in life, right? You're going to be detractors and there's going to be boosters. I prefer to listen to the boosters, but, you know, I will take under advisement what the detractors say, but I certainly am not unhappy that I didn't listen to the people who said don't do Zen or don't do storyboard graphic novels.
What's been the most rewarding aspect of being a comic book creator for you?
Well, okay. I love meeting the fans. You know, whatever you do in life, if there are some people who like what you do and they want to meet you, in my case, want to get my autograph, it's really nice. To do anything that people admire, like, enjoy, and value you as the person who can do this, that's the greatest. You know, it's nice to make a few dollars, don't get me wrong, but, you know, ultimately in life, you want some people to like whatever it is you do. And that's what happens every time I'm at a comic book convention. So I'm very blessed, very blessed.
And if it was just about adding some dollars, you would have finished law school.
Right on.
So instead,
Right
you followed against probably many people telling you, what are you doing?
Yeah, follow your own lights, do what you like, and be good to people.